Yes, perfect. Thank you so much for the introduction, Meryl, and welcome to everyone who is on this call. As Meryl mentioned, I'm Nathan Ross Adams. I like doing these presentations a bit differently in that I prefer to be I at least prefer to be interactive. So if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. Uh, ask as many as you want, and if you want to clarify a point or have a comment, please pop it in the chat as well. So I'll start off by sharing my screen. You can just please let me know if you can see it.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to start off with hello, because that's the best way to start off. I'm really excited to be talking to you guys today. It's a topic that's very close to what I practice on a day-to-day basis. So just to tell you a bit about me, I started in the legal industry, then I moved over, but I've always had an interest in computer science as well. So anything computer, tech, software related fascinated me, and so what I did is I thought, let me combine these insights that I have from both fields and offer something unique. And so I'm not a traditional lawyer. I essentially offer, well, with the firm that I'm at, I offer three primary services. And the first is legal advice, the second is commercial advice, and the third is technical advice. So the legal advice is pretty self-explanatory. The commercial advice is how organizations could actually use or look at emerging technologies and Web3 technologies and actually create value for their organization, but as well as fundraise. And then the last is technical advice. So that would be on the specific Web3 technologies themselves, how it could actually be used from how it can be explained, how it can be interacted with. So essentially, for my clients, I'm usually the go-between between legal, the commercial team, and then also the technical team. So whoever is in IT. And then just moving along to a bit about the firm. So I'm an attorney at a firm called Michelson's. We're based in Cape Town, but we're a global law firm. And essentially, we practice data law and we practice technology law. So anything POPIA related, Cybercrimes Act related, that's what we do. We also deal with all sorts of traditional software and hardware clients, as well as mobile telecommunications companies, and then also in the emerging law space. So anything relating to AI, blockchain, cryptocurrency, that's what we specialize in. And then just looking at a bit more at you. So as I mentioned earlier, I'd like this to be as interactive as possible. So please ask questions. I explained a bit about myself, so I'm going to pop a question in the chat, which would be directed at you. Well, two questions I have. The first question is a pretty simple one, and you can just pop a message in the chat to respond. But it's basically, in which industry do you work? Is it only research? Is it commerce, tech, legal, or other? And while your responses come in, the reason I'm asking these questions is actually to tailor this presentation that we'll have to you. Yeah, so feel free to pop your responses in the chat. And then I see a few messages are coming through. So it's telecoms, tech, and then I'm assuming the rest of you will be much more coming through. So a lot of research and tech risk.
Sorry, Nathan Ross.
Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to make sure that everyone's happy that I'm recording this. When you mentioned POPIA, I thought, oops. So just double check if you don't, if you're not happy, please let us know. Otherwise, we'll continue recording. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Meryl. Okay, interesting. So I see you're a mixed bunch, mostly tech research and some local government, some health research, blockchain remittance. Very interesting. So I'm surrounded by a lot of smart people, which can be intimidating, but I'm not going to be intimidated. So I'll pop my next question through, and it's basically what's your understanding level or level of understanding of Web3? Level one, or well, level zero is you completely clueless. You think Web3 is about a new Spider-Man movie. Um, Beginner, so you're just starting out. You have an level two would be an average knowledge, level three advanced, and level four you would be an expert. You know everything about Web3. So, and please don't be ashamed if you're level zero, level one, or two. We all started somewhere, and okay, interesting. So I'm seeing a lot of level threes, level twos, and level ones coming through, which is great. Okay, perfect. So while the responses come in, I'm just going to shift along the presentation screen. So as an introduction, I like starting with why, and why directs the question. Let me see. I'm not sure. Can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So starting with why. So there are three outcomes that I'd like to achieve by the end of this session. So, and I'll just pop in the chat so you have it there as a note. But essentially, it's the first part of the presentation will deal with understanding the fundamentals. Oops, I think that dropped. Would be understanding the fundamentals of Web3. The second is for me to persuade you to adopt a risk-based mindset when conducting your Web3 project. So anything you do that's Web3 related. And then the last would be to protect yourself and your organizations from harm by developing an internal toolkit for evaluating any Web3 offerings. And what I mean by that is, essentially you are going to, I'll equip you with probing questions that you can ask for anyone who offers Web3 technologies, who talks about it, to actually see that or whether they know what they're talking about, and to see whether they actually can provide you with the services that they talk about. So let me use myself as an example. If I were to say that I'm Nathan Ross. I'm your personal Web3 lawyer. I can advise you on anything Web3 related. Your question to me would be, okay, so what do you think Web3 is? Another question would be, how many clients have you done Web3 work for? The third question may be, how many clients have you successfully advised and that it turned into actual that actually benefited the organization? So that's the style of questions that I'll prepare you for. But yeah, so starting with why. Why is a very important thing, but as I mentioned, it's ideally to protect you from harm. If you do offer any service offerings to your customers that may relate to Web3 technology, or you want to conduct research projects on it, it's to place your customers or your stakeholders first. Web3 matters because the world is talking about it, and either regardless of whether you are a skeptic about Web3, or whether you're on the fence or have no knowledge, it's important that you understand that it is a what's tangible about it is that the world is talking about it. Web3 hasn't been realized, actually. It's not in existence yet, but the world is talking about it, and a lot of people are putting money behind it. The next is that there are a lot of challenges with Web3. They present a lot of challenges. They disrupt a lot of existing business models, how people do things. There are also quite a bit of myths about Web3 and what it can actually do. And then there are several business cases as well. So now that you know the why behind this presentation, I'm going to jump into our second stage. And this stage I'm going to take a bit more carefully, but I'm going to, or slowly at least, and work through it carefully. But essentially, I want to give you an overview of Web3 in a way that shows you the fundamentals of the topic. So the fundamentals of the topic can be broken down into three areas. The first area will be the generations of the internet. Second would be the core philosophies underpinning Web3. And then the third would be the main technologies that are talked about in a Web3 context. So let's start with the generations of the internet. So we're at Web3, and that any person who who understands a basic understanding of math will know that there needs to be a 2 or a 1 before that. So before we actually get to the gist of what Web3 is about, let's start with Web 1. So Web 1 would refer to the state of the internet as it was in the 90s, so in the distant past. What well, distant past when you consider the internet as a whole, but when the internet began, the focus was on read only. So what we mean by read only is that the internet as it was available out there during the 90s and early 2000s, the focus was on someone logging onto a web page and reading content. So if you, so say I wanted to know what's happening in the EU with artificial intelligence, I could find a site and I could read through the content and actually learn more about the topic. So it would be me interacting and consuming knowledge that's available out there. It was also pretty decentralized, so there weren't any particular organizations that dominated the internet at that time. So it was decentralized and there was no central authority. So no one was monitoring what was happening. Nobody was taking a sort of or monopolizing on the internet as it was. Then moving along to Web 2. So Web 2 started in the early 2000s, and this is essentially the age of big tech, big data, and new technologies. And what it resulted in is the platform economy as we know it today. So with Web 2, the focus moved from only reading content to also creating content. And what that meant is not only now could we read the article that I was sharing on the screen, which you could see over here, which is basically information. I personally could actually create content and share it with the world. And part of that included interacting with other people. And the perfect example of this is social media like LinkedIn or Facebook. Here's a LinkedIn post that I made about my dissertation that I wrote about last year, my master's dissertation about it was on AI law. And basically I could make a post, I could tag different people who are relevant to that. People could comment and give responses. People could react to that and express an opinion on what I did. So you can see that there's a lot of interaction. So if we were to compare Web 1 to Web 2, the focus shifted from me as personally reading content to me interacting, consuming content, creating content, uh, but also the uprising of centralization. So that meant that the internet became dominated by certain organizations like Google. If you want to look for a search engine today, nobody says, please search for this on your web browser. They would simply say, Google it. If you want to know something, Google it. So these companies called big tech started dominating the internet. And so it moved towards centralization where you had a few organizations, and we're still in the state where a few organizations are monopolizing and capitalizing on the internet. And the reality is that as a result of that, the person who initially consumed content online and created content online became the product, you and me. So whenever we create, our data became the product for Facebook, for LinkedIn, and it essentially, they thought, hey, we could use this model to actually create an advertising market and actually do targeted advertising towards people. So that's the idea, the essential idea behind Web 2, where it became the platform economy. It was about not only consuming information, but also content creation. Now moving along to Web 3, our main topic for today. Web 3 has shifted the view from only creating content, consuming content, to creating content, consuming content, and owning content. So the key function or purpose behind Web3 is that the users, you and me, who actually create the content online, become the owners of that content. I'll give you a practical example. So say you create a Facebook post and it is very popular. Currently, you can't monetize that post in the sense that you cannot sell the post that you created on Facebook's platform to them and they give you money for the post that you created. That's not how it works. How it currently works in the Web2 environment that we're currently in, Facebook owns the data that's on the platform. If anyone who knows about POPIA will tell you that under the POPI Act, you have rights of control over your data, so you can tell them, remove my data, but you don't have ownership rights over your data. Your data isn't treated as property. That's not what the law currently says. But under Web3, the idea is that you would get more ownership of your property or your data. The second point is that we'll move back to a sort of decentralized model, which I'll get to more in more detail later. But essentially, the decentralized model says that, well, we need to have a flat structure. There needs to be no central authority. It's more democratic. Everyone governs what happens to them. And me mentioning that segues us into our next topic. So let me just change the screen. So there are various core philosophies that underpin Web3. And I want you to know that you shouldn't feel bad if your understanding of Web3 as it currently is uncertain and not concrete. It's supposed to feel that way because the concept itself is an ideal. It's a romantic ideal about what people want the world to look like. So Web3 isn't here. I know a lot of people will tell you that Web3 is here. We have these technologies like blockchain and crypto. For Web3 to be truly here, the core philosophies that are currently on the screen need to be met. So let me jump into those core philosophies. So the first philosophy is decentralization, which I mentioned. So decentralization would be, well, essentially means that the control that is currently with big tech or big organizations like Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple is returned to the users. And how that happens is through giving users ownership of their data. That's the theory behind it. And moving along to the next philosophy is ownership. So you would own the content that you would post online. You know the saying that data is the new oil. Well, in my opinion, it's not the new oil. And the reason I say so is because oil is a finite resource, whereas data is not a finite resource. Data doesn't run out, and the way Web3 wants it to be structured is that data will never be deleted. But we'll move into that concept later. And then the next core philosophy is that it's democratic, and what that essentially means is that whoever is an actor in the Web3 economy or Web3 ecosystem will have a say in what happens to themselves, their data, their profiles. And I know it's a bit hazy to understand at the moment, but I'll clarify it a bit later. But the fundamental point that you need to get is that the idea behind Web3 is that whoever is involved in the Web3 ecosystem would be democratically involved. People would elect. It would be the popular vote. The next is equality. So this is where Web3 actually gets, so the last 2 points or the last 2 philosophies, equality and liberty of freedom. This is where Web3 actually intersects with philosophy as we know it, but as well as politics and economics. So when it comes to equality, there is much frustration out there from a financial standpoint that wealth is centralized with a few individuals. Let's say a few individuals. You have billionaires out there, and who are, and I'm not talking about standard billionaires. I'm talking about ultra billionaires where the wealth is centralized to a few people in the world, and so with equality, under Web3, the idea is that the wealth will be distributed democratically amongst the players or actors in the Web3 ecosystem. That is one of the core philosophies behind Web3, and it comes from the political movement that people are tired of not making enough money. People are tired of not having access to wealth, access to resources. And the idea, the Web3 romantic ideal, is that equality, Web3 will achieve equality. Now, moving along to the last core philosophy, which is liberty or freedom. Again, it's a romantic ideal that with Web3 technologies, people will have more freedom to do what they want. So with liberty, the idea is that if you want to enter into any transaction, you can do so. It's also called in philosophy, it's called the cyber libertarian view. And what it essentially says that is that if you want to do business with someone, you need to be able to do business with them online. If you don't want to do business, you can do so. But linked to liberty is free speech, unrestrained free speech. So that's one of the concerns that sorry about that. Just see what's happening on here. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So it's tied closely it's closely connected with free speech. So there are limits here. So you will probably know what's happening with Elon Musk, and he claims that he wants to purchase Twitter to promote free speech. Whether you agree with that is one thing or the next, but ideally, with core philosophies, or anyone who's in a complex society will know that freedom cannot be unrestricted, because my freedom stops where I can use my freedom to injure another person, to say something harmful to another person. That's where freedom needs to be moderated. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the next, moving along from the philosophy, so the abstract, to something less abstract, but still slightly abstract, is the technologies that underpin Web3. I haven't listed all of them over here because this is just a fundamental introduction, but I'll mention a lot of these in passing. So the first one that I'd like to mention is blockchain technology. You would have heard of blockchain, and there are a few blockchain specialists on here, but in the simplest terms, the essence is that blockchain is a distributed or shared ledger or database that essentially captures data. And the way it captures data is immutable, meaning that the data on there cannot change unless the people who own that blockchain or who own that blockchain structure decide so. So if I use the functional equivalence in reality, or our current reality, if you have an Excel spreadsheet or a Google sheet and you have data on there, and that document is shared with multiple people, each of the people you've shared that with will actually have voting rights in that particular in what happens with that particular blockchain. So essentially, it's a shared ledger, and that ledger has immutable information. That's the basics. It's more complex than that, but I'll explain it later to build up on that. But the theory behind blockchain is that it's decentralized. As I mentioned earlier, I mentioned what decentralized means. It means that there's no central authority. It's democratic, number two, and the third is it's peer-to-peer. So it will be on a peer-to-peer network. So the people that it's shared with will essentially be the for lack of a better word, the governors of that blockchain. So in using practical examples, the first practical example of blockchain in action would be cryptocurrency. So, as you know, crypto is a new form of a digital currency. Well, not new anymore, but it's a form of digital currency that is being used to trade. And some restaurants across the world accept Bitcoin, for example, or Ethereum. When I was in the Netherlands, there was a coffee shop that or many years ago, that actually exchanged a cup of coffee for a certain amount of Bitcoin. Obviously, the value's increased since then. But the idea is that you have this currency that would be unregulated and not subject to the ordinary rules. So now I want you to put on your hat that I've explained in Web3 technologies, and essentially decentralized information or technology would be one that wouldn't be subject to a central authority. But because of the reality that you need currencies to be regulated, decentralization is falling away in the sense that you'll have companies and governments who want to regulate the technology. So you'll have a company like Luno, for example, who manages cryptocurrency. They essentially offer the service. Um, and then you'll have certain reserve banks who regulate it, and then also taxation services like SARS, for example, that taxes cryptocurrency. You'll see that they recently added that to their website. So although the ideal for Web3 was that you'll have this unregulated, decentralized technology, it is still regulated, and the regulation is centralized. The question about whether it's democratic or not is also debatable because, well, whoever got first into crypto ultimately becomes the ones who benefit from it. So the people who initially mined cryptocurrency, the people who created certain cryptocurrencies, the wealth is not being distributed equally. It's being distributed to whoever was first to market, and that's the reality. I mean, I'll reference another example later that will explain it more clearly. But then moving along to NFTs or non-fungible tokens. So a lot of people get confused with NFTs, but essentially it's closely connected to ownership. And what it essentially says is that you can verify ownership in a digital um, thing, which, and I don't say property because under law, an NFT is not property, but I'll get into that a bit later. But for now, what I need you to accept is that an NFT is a digital thing that people ascribe value to, and essentially, the idea behind it is that when the Web3 space eventually develops, when the metaverse, as we know it, develops, there'll be a way to exchange digital goods, and that will be through NFTs or non-fungible tokens. Now, back to the point that I mentioned. If anyone tells you that NFTs are property, um, they they won't be. That's far from the truth. The way the law currently stands is, if you have an NFT and you've purchased an NFT and someone sells you property as an NFT, or they tell you they're selling you property in the metaverse, uh, currently under the law, under South African law, under US law, under UK law, NFTs are treated as, or if something goes wrong, they're treated as contractual rights that you have. So you would have a contract with the service provider that actually supplies the NFT. You would have their contract terms, and they would actually govern the relationship. So if something goes wrong, you wouldn't register that property. You couldn't go to the land registry and say, for example, that I have this property that's currently in the metaverse. Um, it belongs to me. It doesn't work like that. You would have to approach the organization, you would have to approach a court, and they would actually advise you on the situation. They'd establish the law relating to that. So that's the second point. The third point relates to DAOs, or decentralized autonomous organizations. I actually wrote a bit about this in my master's dissertation. But decentralized autonomous organizations would be they envision to be the organizations of the future. So imagine you have this Web3, you're in this Web3 environment, you're in the metaverse, and you want to organize people in a way that traditional companies are organized, but you want the philosophies that I've explained of Web3 to inform how that organization is formed. So decentralized autonomous organizations well, they're also called algorithmic organizations or distributed organizations. And the reason is that they're actually based, they found their basis on the blockchain technology that I've mentioned early on. And if we break apart the name, so decentralized autonomous organization, decentralized would mean that it's a flat structure. It is not, there's no central authority, as I mentioned again. Autonomous means that it's self-run. So by self-run, I essentially mean that the ideal, again, is that it will be self-executing. And how it would be self-executing is through smart contracts. So here, let's throw another spanner in the works, smart contracts. So smart contracts, although the word says has contract in it, it's not necessarily a contract or a legal contract, but smart contracts are essentially coded rules that stipulate if X happens, then the result will be Y. If Y happens, the result will be Z. A perfect example of a simple smart contract is a vending machine. If you have a vending machine, you put money in. As soon as you, and say you want to buy a 300 ml Coca-Cola, you put 10 Rand in. The vending machine says that the price over there is 10 Rand for this. You put the money in, it accepts the money, and then it releases the product to you, which is the can of Coke. If you put in 5 Rand, it won't give you that because you haven't satisfied the rule that the Coke is actually 10 Rand. If you give 15 Rand instead of 10 Rand, it's going to return change to you because you've met the rule. But the secondary rule is if you've given more money than you should get money returned. So that's the simplest way to think of a smart contract. It's a self-executing contract. So if you level that up to a decentralized autonomous organization, the idea is that instead of having people making decisions, you would have these smart contracts in place, saying that if I invest 1 Bitcoin in this particular DAO or decentralized autonomous organization, I get 10 voting rights on this DAO, which means that's the limit of my decision-making power. The motivation or goal behind smart contracts and DAOs is that the central idea is that you wouldn't have people having to make decisions. So the idea is that you would have simple rules that would govern an entire organization. I think that's a bit wishy-washy for where the current state of technology is. I don't agree that we're at the point where we can have these complex DAOs or decentralized autonomous organizations and have them fully run on smart contracts. And why I say so is based on the data, on my research, based on the data that's out there, the technology underpinning DAOs, so like blockchain, crypto, smart contracts, they're not at the level where DAOs can be fully functional. And practically speaking, I have a friend who she advises major organizations, fashion houses on entering the metaverse, and she's based in the US, and she runs or she's an advisor on one of the world's biggest DAOs, and called Metagame Hub. And we had a meeting, and I was asking about decentralization. I was asking about being autonomous, and she said, if anyone tells me that their organization is completely decentralized or autonomous, they are talking complete nonsense, because ultimately you need people. You need people to run these organizations until technology is at the point where it can actually be self-fulfilling. let's leave it at that, and then look at the next point, which is essentially that while this is so exciting, Web3 is exciting. It's a dream. It's an ideal. It is underpinned by these amazing philosophies which are out there. The reality is that there's no guarantee that it's going to actually exist. And although a lot of people out there, if you read a lot of articles online, um, that suggest that Web3 is inevitable, we don't know that it's inevitable. The data doesn't support that it's inevitable. And I'll give you a few reasons why. But basically, okay, I think there's someone in the chat, Zubair, who mentioned that is a DAO ultimately going to be run by AI? That's a possibility. So in my dissertation, I mentioned that it's possible for a DAO to be run by AI, where AI would be could be the shareholders or the directors on a DAO, but that would presuppose that the AI has enough data to be trained on, quality data, not necessarily only big data, but quality data that explainability is going to be a key part of it. I mean, if you see on my screen now, the EU is currently in the process of enacting a draft law on AI, the first of its kind in the world, and it will deal with the development, deployment, and use of AI. It essentially says that it adopts a risk-based approach to the law, but it essentially says that there are types of AI which won't be allowed. So if there's the potential, like someone else in the chat mentioned, that it is used for harm, it won't be allowed. But also AI, I mean, I practice AI law. I have a lot of clients who are companies that have AI solutions and robotics solutions, and they've emphatically said that AI isn't at the point where it's being sold. So it's being sold that it's the solution to all of our problems. But what we do know is that it can create harm. There is the potential for it to create harm. But yeah, I'll pop these links in the chat. But the next point that I wanted to move to, just moving back to the technologies that underpin it. With crypto, for example, one of the big problems is that it consumes a lot of energy. So the data scientists, the computer coders, the computer scientists rather, uh, when they compare blockchain-based cryptocurrency to existing traditional software models, the amount of energy that cryptocurrency consumes is not efficient. So let's please don't hate me for saying this, but let's reduce cryptocurrency to a simple gambling machine that you would have at a casino. The amount of time, the amount of power or energy that casino gambling machine would require currently exceeds the practical nature of that cryptocurrency, but as well as the benefits that they are proposing. The second issue at the moment with cryptocurrency is that there's a lot of scams out there where because Web3 and crypto are these out there concepts, they're abstract, they're intangible, and they're not regulated. The risk is that people will lose money. So yeah, and then there's also the argument that blockchain will halt innovation and frustrate personal data rights. It depends on which side of the table you are. Some people say blockchain will increase ownership rights. Great, that is possible. But on the other hand, because blockchain ledgers are immutable or binding, it would be fixed, which means it needs significant amount of data to be run, and that data cannot be deleted unless all the shareholders or interested parties or token holders actually make the decision to do so. So that's one of the core issues with it. But just moving along to moving back, there, as I mentioned at the beginning, there is There are three outcomes for this session. The first is to get an understanding of Web3, and I hope you have a basic understanding of that now. The second was to realize that you need to adopt a risk-based mindset and approach. And the third was about protecting yourself from harm. And so I would like to simulate an example of how you could do so. And the example would be, say you're approached by a service provider, they tell you, and they speak about Web3 technologies, and they say to you, we can do this for you, we can achieve X for you. Or they give you, they say they can achieve certain outcomes for you. That's great. It's a great sales proposition. But at the end of the day, you're making a decision that will either impact yourself quite significantly or impact your organization quite significantly. So what you would need to do is address that issue by asking skeptical questions. And what I'm not suggesting is that you become a skeptic about any sort of technology, but what I'm suggesting instead is that you adopt an inquiring mindset. I mean, for the people that are on this call that have studied anything using the scientific method in its essence is that you need to try as best as possible to move towards the objective truth of reality. And how you can do so is by asking probing questions. So question one, for example, this great Web3 service provider comes to you and says, we can do X. You would need to ask them, number one, tell me more about your business. Tell me more about your understanding of Web3 technologies. What value do you suggest you can offer my organization? That would be the start. The next set of questions would relate to their track record. So how many clients have you successfully implemented this with? How many clients have you offered advice about this? What percentage of your clients have relied on your advice and it been successful or not successful? They don't need to disclose who the clients are, but they need to give you stats. And this can be under a non-disclosure agreement that you have with them that covers this information. The other question that you can ask is what guarantees they would give you. Well, what rights would you have under the contract with them? And the idea behind this is to get the conversation started, to highlight and discover your own concerns that you have, but also to understand the concerns of the potential service provider. Another point that I'd like to mention is that trust is the foundation for all of your relationships that you'll have with your stakeholders. So these could be your customers, your colleagues, your employees, your employers, friends, but the same applies to your commercial relationships. So in your commercial relationships that you'd have with Web3 service providers, you need to ensure that trust is the foundation for those relationships. And the best way you can do so is by adopting the risk-based approach or risk-based mindset. But yeah, that's basically it from me in a nutshell. We have a few minutes left, but I'd like to just check in with you if you have any questions, any comments, any concerns, anything else you want to talk about. And yeah. Maybe I should actually look in the chat. Okay, so yes, there will be a recording available. Zubair, would you mind turning on your mic and just telling us your concerns about social monitoring as opposed to freedom? I see you mentioned in China or other places the web is used to monitor and control as opposed to promote freedom. Are you with us? I always feel like I'm conducting a seance when I'm on these calls and no one's actually in the room.
So I'm here. So, so I mean, there's been a bit of discussion about scams, etc. And I think what's important is that people need to realize that it's not blockchains that have been hacked necessarily that are the scams. It's often kind of social engineering. It's about people sharing their private keys with others, their wallets with passwords to wallets, etc., etc. And it's also about greed. You know, crypto is not a get rich quick scheme. It really is not. Maybe if you're lucky and you got in early, but you know, it's you know, it takes as much time to earn, you know, a good, you know, to kind of make money with crypto as with any other kind of investment. So yeah, and then I just also wanted to say that I have mixed feelings about the whole Web3 environment because you know, people don't want the responsibility. You know, people don't want to have responsibility for their identity, for their data, for, you know, voting if it's a DAO or something like that. You know, so that, you know, it's we are our own worst enemy. You know, so that's just my view on kind of Web3 going forward. I think there need to be checks and balances, and maybe those could be provided by smart contracts and AI, etc. When the technology is ready. But I think people are basically lazy and they don't want that responsibility. They're quite happy for Google and Facebook and Amazon to own their data. That's my opinion anyway.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it's right,
Mhm.
but I'm saying that human nature, you know.
I get you. And ultimately at the end, well, a big part of the conversation is about trade-offs. So what am I'm giving my data to this company, what am I getting in exchange for it? If you're giving your data to Facebook, the value that Facebook probably gets out of your data is 10 times more than what you are than you ascribe to it. Otherwise, it wouldn't make commercial or economic sense. But when it comes to blockchain's interesting in that it it is security conscious from an information and technology security perspective. It is security conscious, but it has its flaws in that, as you mentioned, if you imagine a pipe and a pipe is blockchain. Let's just go with the analogy of plumbing and a pipe, and the entire pipe represents blockchain. Uh, at the end of each side of the pipe, you have human beings like you and me, assuming there are no bots on this call, and the organizations that are responsible for blockchain can't essentially be responsible for what we do online or what we do on blockchain. But that's where regulation comes in to protect people. That's where the law steps into play. The law says, oh well, should people be protected in this scenario? But the law is very slow to catch up to that. That's a reality. But one of the issues with blockchain at the moment is that it's not well, what's the word? Not transferable, but you can't, well, you can technically cross-link blockchains, but when you cross-link blockchains, so say you have two different cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, you have Ethereum, and you want to exchange the currencies on a certain blockchain network. Where you do a bridge between those two networks, that bridge is particularly vulnerable to attack. Cyber attackers are currently targeting that quite significantly. So there are security risks where the audience or the network expands or connects to other networks in a way that, from a technical perspective, there is a big risk over there. But moving along to crypto, as you mentioned as well, Meryl, the concern with crypto is that it's being sold as this can make you money. This is the solution to all of the problems that you're experiencing out there. And the reality is that that's not true. Unless you are in first, as you mentioned, and as I mentioned earlier on, the likelihood of you benefiting depends on the data. What does the data say? If we look at Bitcoin, if we look at Ethereum, the data suggests that the ones who got in early benefited from it. Yes, there are some dips where people suddenly buy in and they gain wealth, but they never gain as much or proportionate wealth to the people who actually got in at the beginning. So ultimately, the idea is to have mixed wallets, mixed crypto wallets, to get financial advice from an advisor who actually specialize in crypto, because you do get financial advisors who have specialized in crypto, and just broaden your investment or investment framework or financial plan so that you can benefit from these technologies. But yeah, that's my last point on that. I see there's one question about what is the metaverse. It sounds like a sim game or Minecraft. Do various companies, Google, Meta, have their own version of the metaverse, or does everyone plug into the same metaverse? So it's a misnomer, or if someone says the metaverse to you, you think it's one place, but you can have multiple metaverses, or the multiverse, where Facebook has its own metaverse, Google has its own metaverse, but it's also possible for them to talk to each other. So for the metaverses or multiverses to talk to each other. Currently, where it stands is, again, the technology is lagging behind. It's suffering from three main problems. The first problem is a computing problem. We do not have the computing resources to sustain the metaverse as it is. The second is a bandwidth problem. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then the last one is the technical debt problem, which is a technical term, but if I could summarize it, is that people are jumping quickly into the market. So they're quickly investing into it. There's amazing ideas behind the metaverse, but they're doing quick fixes. But the technical debt that results from that is, later down the line, whoever later invests in the organization is going to have to bear the costs of the things that haven't been done properly. So that's another important thing to think about. Any last questions? I see someone raised their hand. Going, gone.
Nathan Ross. So yeah, I mean, just ask people to actually, if they need to, they can send something in the chat. Is it okay? Are you happy to then just respond offline if necessary, via the chat environment?
What I'll do is, I have this thing where, I love conversations with people. I love interacting with people. So I usually allocate about an hour a week to answering questions that anyone may have. I'll pop my email address into the chat, and you can ask me any questions that you may have. And if I can help you, I'll help you. Otherwise, I'll refer you to someone who can help you. I do want to do one last thing, which is let me just stop sharing, which is invite you to a conference that we're having in June, which will address some more of the concerns relating to AI in the metaverse, and Web3. It's called the Lexverse Conference, and we're having it on the 8th of June. It's essentially in Cape Town at Lagoon Beach Hotel and Spa, or you can attend online or virtually. We have speakers from Paris, the guy who actually advised on the EU's AI Act that they currently have. We have MNC Saatchi Abel's Mike Abel, who started MNC Saatchi Abel, the advertising agency, speaking about how you can actually create opportunities within the metaverse and Web3 technologies, as well as multiple topics. So feel free to book for the conference. Tickets are running out. So book as soon as you can, and you can treat it as an organizational expense, because it will benefit your team. But otherwise, I'll pop my email in the chat, and my LinkedIn profile as well, and you can reach out to me, shout if you have any questions. And yeah, it was really good interacting with you. You're an amazing group of people. Thank you very much, Meryl.